I was walking down over on Michigan Avenue looking for something to eat, and I happened on this block where there was a Japanese and a falafel place, restaurant. Now, I looked down at the Japanese place, and then there's some graffiti out front. It doesn't seem as well kept as the falafel one, so I decided to go into the falafel restaurant instead. Between the two, I had the choice. So I go into this falafel restaurant, and upon entering, I see that they don't got people taking the orders. They have computers. They have these tablets with these little buttons on them that you take the order from. And I'm kind of sitting there because this was the first time I've ever seen that. I've always had somebody take my food, and it was the first time I felt kind of out of place, like it wasn't. It was just unfamiliar, I suppose. So I take my order. I pay $13 for the food I got, and the ironic part is they asked me for a tip. They asked me for a tip. I had not even made eye contact with a person until that point of entering the restaurant, and they asked me to pay the person who was supposedly serving me that had not yet served me. It felt like it was against traditional tipping etiquette, I suppose, but I realized any man that works in a restaurant that treats their employees as such probably could use the extra $2. I kind of pitied him a little bit, so I gave him the $2 tip or whatever, the 18%. So after that, the total added up after tax about $20. A little bit more than I wanted it to be, but I figured, hell, I don't feel like leaving now. I'm already too deep in the trenches with these buttons and whatnot, so I'd commit to it. Now, I go to sit down and I start to take account of my surroundings, and I'm starting to realize the aesthetics of the restaurant I was in. What was almost this modern by our time speaking, not modern by the 1960s, but but anyways, everything was kind of this beige or very dull colors. There was steel on the chairs. They were the polished stainless steel, though, not the kind of stuff that's rustic or whatever. They go after that aesthetic. But I sit down after kind of staring at these two tables because I said, well, do I want to face north or do I want to face south? And I decided south because there's I thought there was more to see, people walking by. Anyways, I sit down, and in front of me is this piece of art, and it's this black and white, which is almost ironic because it was kind of like an allegory for the very situation. There was no in-between nature. There was no human touch in that restaurant. It was purely designed by committee or robot or some I can't quite tell. It felt like I was sitting in a robot's idea of what humans like, this very clean, very aesthetically inoffensive building. And the painting, not the painting, but the print or whatever it was just black and white, just like the building. Because when there's a human touch, you see this, it's not always black and white. It's kind of mixed in between. You kind of expect that out of humanity. We make mistakes. We mix stuff up. We make it ours. And there was nothing in there that told me it was ours. It was just cold, alienating, gray, steel. Anyways, I get my food on a metal tray, and I felt like it was like out of a prison lunchroom, it's like fucking metal tray. And the potatoes I had ordered, I ordered these things called Greek potatoes. They looked quite good, and the potatoes I ordered were in a plastic box, and the falafel I had was kind of lazily put together, and the ingredients weren't very high quality. I was kind of disappointed in it, and I realized I think the restaurant was made with a takeout in mind, but the important part is that the food itself was underwhelming, and the food itself was a lot like packaged, especially a lot like the restaurant and the sentiment I was expressing earlier. The lacking human touch. There was no messiness. It was all properly contained. The man didn't give me a cup of soda. He gave me a can of Coke. He gave me it in a can. He pulled it right out of the fridge. I watched him walk over across the restaurant, pull it out of the neatly organized fridge, and put it on my table. Said, "Here you go." And I was like, "Oh, thank you so much. I don't want to make that man's day any worse than it had to be." But it was just this entire experience was missing, I think, one of the most important parts of why people go out in public to eat, and that is the humanity in the situation. I could go and order food and sit in my room and, I don't know, read a book or something, and that doesn't have any socialization. But you go to a restaurant and you see it's filled with life, and it's filled with color and design and that error and that humanity, essentially. And I think that's why people do that. So it kind of made me think, this restaurant was what I would describe as modern. It was kind of the modern, inoffensive aesthetic. And it made me think that this is probably what the future of most restaurants are going to wind up being, is this hyper optimized, clean, inoffensive. Because ultimately, just for the exact same reasons I decided not to go to that Chinese place or that Japanese place, I went to the falafel one, because ultimately there was graffiti. The Asian one was messy. It was, I suppose, now that I look back on it, I think I'm going to find the time to go to that Asian restaurant to kind of spite the very fact that I had to torture myself with this alienating falafel place. Anyways, made me think about a lot of things, and how I think there's this tendency towards ease and tendency towards, non-abrasive. People don't want to disagree with you, and I think the modern restaurant and the modern art, and in some cases other things like cars and entertainment, they don't want to offend you. And I think there's something so human and important in being offended. Not an offended like, oh my goodness, that is against my very values, but offensive like a different color besides black and white in a different way, or some design that isn't necessary but still aesthetically looks beautiful, or something like that. But instead they shave it down to its only most bare bones of. And I'll stop talking about it. I'm gonna go eat a peach now. Kind of hungry, but